Tu Tien's husband's father suddenly appears. While life is gradually stabilizing after the flood, the sudden appearance of a strange man claiming to be Tu Tien's father-in-law has turned everything upside down. Does Jack suspect her? What secrets are being hidden? Follow along now. Thank you for watching my video. Wish you a happy new day. The afternoon fell faster than usual, the last rays of sunlight flickering through the dense trees on both sides of the village road. Tu Tien walked briskly, the bamboo basket behind her clattering with squash and a few bags of vegetables that had just been sold at the market. The familiar road was now tinged with a strange loneliness, as if something was waiting at the end of the road. When she passed the bend next to the bamboo grove, she suddenly stopped. An abandoned house by the roadside, usually a place that few people visited, suddenly showed signs of being inhabited. The rotten door was slightly open. Inside was dimly lit by a small oil lamp. Tu Tien squinted, curiously looking in. A figure was lying on its side, half of its body leaning against the wall. It was a man, thin, with a worn-out coat, his feet covered in mud. His face was hidden behind the brim of an old hat, his silver-flecked hair reflecting the pale yellow light from the lamp. He lay motionless, as if he were sleeping, but also as if he wasn't. At that moment, Tu Tien's heart suddenly beat strongly, not because of fear, but because of a sudden premonition that arose from the depths of her memory. She crept closer. Her feet seemed to be drawn towards that figure, each step making her chest tighten. When she was only a few steps away, her eyes stopped on the man's face. Even though he had aged a lot, was more austere, thinner, it was still the face she could never forget, the man who used to be her father-in-law. Tu Tien was shocked. Her eyes widened, her hands trembled slightly. In a moment that seemed like time stopped, old memories rushed back like a flood. The days living in the house forced her to flee from the past. And yet now, he appeared, in the most unexpected place, in the most miserable situation. She took another step, her voice choked. Dad, Dad, is it, Dad? The man moved slightly, slowly. He raised his sunken and tired eyes. His gaze met hers like a knife silently cutting through the defenses in her heart. In those eyes, there was surprise, there was recognition, and there was also an unspeakable torment. He whispered, his voice hoarse like the wind blowing through the wilderness. Is that you, Tu Tien? The two stood facing each other, one carrying an unhealed memory, the other carrying an unsettled regret. The wind blew through the broken window again, blowing pieces of old newspaper to the floor. No one said another word in that moment. The space seemed frozen, only the sound of the wind, the pounding of hearts, and the eyes meeting each other, filled with the past, full of secrets and an unspoken solution. Tu Tien paused, his voice, hoarse, weak, like a piece of soul from the distant past, echoed back, making her heart ache. After so many years, she thought she would never see him again. The person who was the symbol of a family that she had left behind because of too much pain and suffering. But now, he sat before her, his appearance haggard and his eyes no longer proud like before. Why are you here, Dad? How long have you been living like that? She asked, her voice trembling slightly, unable to hide her sobs. The man chuckled, a crooked and sad smile. Since the day you left, home is no longer home. Your mother got sick, and died a few years later. And Dung, he paused. His eyes suddenly darkened, he also left without a trace. Dad was alone, and then the house was sold. Dad has been wandering since then. Tu Tien didn't know what she was feeling, a little pain, a little pity, and somehow a burden lifted from her heart. The years she lived in her husband's house were days of being treated like a shadow, enduring all the harsh words from her mother-in-law, while her husband was cold and indifferent. Her father-in-law, who was now sitting in front of her, used to be a quiet, strict person, and seemed to be the one who treated her the best in that family. But now, his appearance was just a haggard old man, worn down by the years and loneliness. Didn't Dad come to find you? He sighed, his eyes looking out into the space in front of him as if to avoid it. I thought about it, but then stopped. I felt like I had no face left. You've suffered too much for my family. Now seeing you like this, I don't expect to ask for anything. It's just, I passed by here these past few days. My health was not good. So I stopped by this abandoned house to take shelter from the rain. Who would have thought I would meet you? Tu Tien was confused. She lowered her head, her heart in turmoil. There were wounds that she thought had long since healed. But when she faced the person who had caused those wounds, they ached again. But she was no longer the resigned girl of the past. Through many incidents, many floods that swept away her house and dreams, she had learned how to stand up from the rubble. Learned how to forgive, first of all. For herself. Dad, will you come home with me? My house is not far from here. Anyway, it's almost dark. Staying here is not safe. He looked at her, his eyes trembling with emotion. What did you say? Come with me? Yes. Come back for now. We still have many things we haven't had time to say to each other. And I think maybe this is the time to start over. For the first time in many years, he shed tears. The tears flowed down his wrinkled face due to time, but they made him feel as relieved as a child. Tu Tien bent down and helped him stand up. His thin shoulders leaned on hers. Like a silent exchange, like a belated compensation between two people who used to be relatives. Then separated by things that had never been said. On the way back, the sun had disappeared behind the mountain. Only a pale orange light covered the sky. But in Tu Tien's heart, something warmed up, as if after all the devastation, a small miracle was gradually sprouting again. It was dusk when Jack returned from the farm. He had just left with the survey team, still worried about the renovation of the farm for Tu Tien. He did not see her in the yard, intending to go look for her, when he suddenly heard rustling footsteps outside the gate. Jack turned around. Tu Tien's figure appeared, but what made Jack freeze was the man walking beside her. He walked hunched over, looking haggard and haggard. Jack frowned, his wary eyes fixed on the stranger. Tu Tien stopped as soon as she saw Jack, awkwardly saying, Jack, I have something to tell you. Jack did not answer immediately. His eyes stopped on the man's face, then turned to Tu Tien. The confusion in her eyes made his heart sink. A strange, uncomfortable feeling welled up in his chest, as if there was suddenly an invisible wall between him and her. Who is he? Jack's voice was low, colder than usual. Tu Tien paused, her hand lightly gripping the handlebars. She swallowed, and replied softly, It's my ex-father-in-law. The air seemed to thicken. Jack stared at her, then turned his gaze to the man. The other man just lowered his head, silently saying nothing. That moment lasted only a few seconds, but it was as heavy as a storm about to fall. Jack didn't speak right away. She felt his eyes examining her, waiting for an explanation. I met him, by chance. On the way back. He was temporarily living in an abandoned house. He looked very weak. I couldn't leave him there alone. Jack still didn't speak. His face gradually became tense. The emotions in his heart were swirling. Was it confusion? Was it doubt? Or was it fear that he didn't really understand the girl he loved? Why didn't you tell me from the beginning? He finally spoke, his voice slow but sharp. How long do you think you can hide this? I didn't mean to hide it. Xian almost burst into tears. She looked up, her eyes red. I don't know where to start. I didn't expect to see him again, even less in this situation. The man remained silent, just bowed his head, his bony hands trembling slightly. There was a long silence. Jack clenched his hands. He wasn't someone who got angry easily. But at this moment his heart was in turmoil, because of surprise. Because Xian had once had a husband that he didn't fully know about. And because that man was somehow making the distance between them vague. What are you going to do next? Jack asked, his eyes filled with doubt. Bring him back to live with you? Xian looked at him, tears welling up in her eyes but trying to hold them back. I don't know, I just can't bear to leave him. After all, he was once a relative. And now, he has no one left. Jack was silent. For the first time, he felt helpless. He loved her. He was willing to fix the whole farm for her. Willing to stand by her side in front of the whole world. But at this moment, between them appeared a piece of memory that he could not touch. A past full of wounds that he could not heal, nor erase. I need some time, Jack said, his voice hoarse. He turned and walked into the house. Tu Tien stood silently next to the bicycle, her heart aching. She did not blame Jack. She understood that he was in shock. But the look in his eyes just now hurt more than the flood. Because for the first time, between them, there was an untouchable silence. The father-in-law still stood silently beside him, his eyes watching Jack's figure disappear behind the door. He spoke, soft as a breeze. "You don't need to lose your happiness because of me?" Tu Tien turned around, shook her head, her eyes dry but full of determination. "No. If you are a relative, you have to face it. Both the past and the present. No matter how hard it is." It was getting dark. In the small house, the yellow light from the kitchen quietly crept into the corner of the porch. Tu Tien was cooking a small pot of porridge, occasionally looking up at the door, where her father-in-law was sitting quietly on an old bamboo chair. He didn't say anything, just quietly watched the cats curled up in the straw basket, his face pensive as if wondering whether he should stay here or if he had gone too far to turn back. Footsteps echoed from the yard. Tu Tien startled and turned around. It was Jack. He stood in front of the door for a few seconds, then slowly walked in, holding a thin coat in his hand. His eyes met Tu Tien's. He didn't say anything, just nodded gently. Then he turned to the man. "Hello, Uncle," Jack spoke, his voice low and calm. "I'm Jack, the one who lives with Tu Tien." The man looked up, his eyes surprised. He nodded slightly, slowly standing up. "Uncle, thank you for taking care of her." "It's nothing," Jack said, moving closer to him. "I was a little confused just now. Not because of you, but because I didn't know that Tu Tien's past had such deep wounds." The man was silent. Jack continued. "You know, since I met her, I've learned a lot. The resilience, the quiet endurance, and how one can stand up after seemingly impossible losses." He put his coat on the table, then looked straight into his eyes. "You were Tu Tien's family. No matter what the past was, no matter how old the story was at this moment, I believe you need a place to stop. And she also needs a complete ending to that past." He said nothing, his eyes red, filled with tears, his voice choked. "I was very wrong. I couldn't protect it. I let it live like a shadow in the house. I didn't dare to ask for forgiveness. I didn't dare to dream of staying. But seeing it like this, I'm so grateful." Jack approached, gently holding his hand. "None of us are perfect. But if you're willing, I think you can start over. With us." The space seemed to quiet down. A minute later, he nodded slightly, tears rolling down his cheeks. Tu Tien stood by the stove, still holding the ladle of porridge, her eyes red. She didn't interrupt the conversation, but every word Jack said poured into her heart like a warm stream. The man she loved, still the same, always silently stood by her side, even when she hadn't had time to speak. Outside, the wind blew gently through the canopy of trees. The fallen leaves rustled like a comforting word. In the small kitchen warmed by the lamplight, a dinner was about to be served, not only to nourish the body, but also to heal the cracks from the past. And there, free people, souls who were once drifting and hurt, are starting to find each other again. Quietly but lovingly.
Mẹ là cả bầu trời, mẹ là gió mát ban trưa, xua tan nắng gắt đẩy đưa cơn sầu. Mẹ là ánh sáng ban đầu, dẫn con qua những bể đau của đời. Mẹ là bếp lửa không vơi, nhen lên hạnh phúc dạng người ấm êm. Mẹ là giấc mộng dịu êm, du con từ thuở chưa quen tiếng cười. Đôi tay mẹ cả đất trời, gom bao nhiêu vất vả chẳng lời thở than. Đôi vai mẹ tựa mây ngàn, gánh bao năm tháng gian nan chẳng nề. Con lớn khôn mẹ cận kề, âm thầm như gió đi về quanh sân. Con đi xa mẹ vẫn gần.